Hi, it's Professor Chew, and in our course on the classical world in film in the spring of 2015 in the Department of Classics at Rutgers University, we have reached our last film. Our last film is one that, on the surface, has nothing at all to do with the ancient world of the Greeks and Romans. It's called Sullivan's Travels, released in 1941 and by the American director Preston Sturges. It is a comedy. It is considered a classic. And it is about a Hollywood film director, played by Joel McCrea, whose name is John L. Sullivan, who wants to make a serious movie, a movie, as he says, that will be a commentary about modern conditions, stark reform, a true canvas of suffering humanity. Sullivan has made his name in Hollywood as director of comedies with names like Ants in Your Pants. And he wants to film a movie that has a title that will be very familiar to us, as you'll see. He wants to film movies that are about the real world. So he ends up on a bit of an odyssey, shall we say. He meets a girl. He travels around. He has adventures in clothes that are not his own, in disguise. He ends up seeing, many different sorts of people, so to speak. I'm quoting from the start of the Odyssey. And he also encounters great suffering. And it is a comedy. There is a happy ending, and sort of even a marriage at the end. So, why are we watching this movie? It would become very clear to you why we're watching it when you start within, I think, about the first 5 or 10 minutes. But also because the movie is, as I said, a classic. And this is a classics class, and it's also, a chance for us to think a little bit about what the word classic means. The word classic is from a Latin word classis, Classis, which actually refers to a fleet of ships, but also comes to mean a class or division of people. At one point in early Roman history, one of the Roman kings, Servius Tullius, divided the Roman people into 6 different classes. From there, the word evolves into meaning a class as of students, and then comes to stand for people of a certain status, and in particular what was a high status, so to speak. And that high status becomes attached to Greek and Latin literature, the study of Greek and Latin, because these in the Western world have been considered subjects that, were meant for the study of the higher classes. Not the case anymore, right? Here we are having an online class about the classics. I bring that up, though, the issue of class, because that is an issue that is talked about a lot in Sullivan's Travels. John Sullivan, the director, is, as you'll see, he is from a certain class in your society. I believe we call it WASP. And he wants to find out about what it's really like to suffer, what it's really like to be someone who is of the lower classes, who has nothing. I think that's a theme that we've talked about quite a bit in our class, in our discussions about slavery, and certainly watching Spartacus and many other films. We've also certainly talked a lot about, what's real, what's accurate, what's faithful to the truth, what's faithful to the Greek and Roman story, what's faithful to the Greek and Roman history. One of Sullivan's considerations when he makes movies is that he doesn't want to just make these stupid comedies about talking horses. He wants to make something about real life that will really carry a message and teach people. So keep those things in mind as you're watching the movie, because in a lot of ways this is a movie, Sullivan's Travels, that is a movie about movies. What is the purpose of movies? What is the purpose of entertainment? Think about that in terms of the movies that we've watched over the course of the semester. Another thing I'd like you to think about as you're watching, this is actually a possible paper topic. The paper topics have been listed for the essay number 3. This is one of them. This topic asks you to take Sullivan's Travels and think about how does it fit into some of the genres of ancient literature that we have read and studied this semester. The first, of course, is epic. Sullivan, as I said, is on a sort of odyssey, and he could indeed be considered an Odysseus-like figure in his wanderings, his adventures, perhaps. There's also a reference to in the title Sullivan's Travels to Gulliver's Travels, the satirical novel in 4 parts by Jonathan Swift, which some of you may or may not have read or maybe seen the movie, which about the first part of Gulliver's Travels, in which Gulliver visits the Lilliputians, the little people. Another genre that is, of course, to be considered in Sullivan's Travels is that of comedy. The movie is a comedy, on our terms of what a comedy is. And we certainly talked a lot about Roman comedy, what's funny. And here we do see not only laughs, but also the depiction of the so-called lower classes. This in Roman comedy, slaves, the use of vernacular language. In Sullivan's Travels, there are, what we'll see is hobos. The 1941 is when Sullivan's Travels came out. So the movie appears at the very end of when the Depression was over in the U.S. And also, of course, the beginning of World War II. So, and Sullivan's Travels, in a lot of ways, is very aware of its historical moment of being a movie, coming with links to a certain kind of a genre of Hollywood movie that really tries to look at real problems. Social realism is one name for this. For instance, in 1940, the movie of the Grapes of Wrath, John Steinbeck's novel about Okies who came after the Dust Bowl to California. So Sullivan's Travels is kind of operating in that framework. But remember, it is a comedy. And comedies sometimes are about things that maybe don't always seem funny. And also, of course, you should think about Sullivan's Travels in terms of tragedy, Greek tragedy. The movie does raise the question of, suffering. Can suffering be entertaining? Do people want to see suffering? We've looked at suffering, in terms of reading Greek tragedy, Medea and Iphigenia. I also want to call your attention to Protagonists, the documentary that we saw early on, which took Greek tragedy and, interspersed it with the stories of 4 men, all of whom, for extreme reasons, ended up in extreme situations. Maybe there's a little bit of Sullivan in them, too. Finally, in watching the movie, there's some things I'd like you to look at. Preston Sturges is a master filmmaker. You don't need to hear me saying that. But just keep this in mind as you're watching. The movie actually has 3 beginnings. Count them. And one of them puts you into a movie that isn't really the movie we're watching. You were going to watch. That may not make any sense at all. It probably doesn't. But I think it'll make sense when you watch the movie. So there's kind of a movie that starts the movie. And then when Sullivan goes on his travels, this kind of occurs in 4 parts. And, you can think about the parts as well. Some of it's a classic American road movie. Sullivan hits the road. He gets a lift, actually, from a military vehicle, so to speak. 2, there's something called a screwball comedy that the Sullivan finds himself in. Keep in mind that sort of the definition of a screwball comedy involves a female protagonist who is in control. There's a girl in this movie. Number 3, there is a part of this movie in which you'll see it is silent. And this is a part actually when there's a long extended stretch involving hobos living in very impoverished conditions. And there's music, but there is no dialogue. And 4th, social commentary could be said to be the last sort of movie that Sullivan finds himself in. So, think about that, sort of like the way Odysseus, ends up in all these different kinds of settings. Sullivan in Sullivan's travels through lots of different kinds of movie genres and really raises the question, again, of what is entertainment? What is the purpose of the movies? To make us laugh, to make us learn, to raise our social consciousness, to let us forget our cares and the sufferings of the world, to amuse us for a moment. One of the points that the movie, it makes in a comical way, maybe semi-seriously or not, is that all roads lead to Hollywood. Keeping in mind that our course is a course in the classical world and film, I'm going to say, all roads lead to Rome, right? So think about Sullivan's Travels and how he gets back to where he becomes, or he began, and, where does he end up after that?